All right, I'm going to start the recording, get a few announcements, and then hand it over to Dave. Um, and Mark and I will monitor the chat. And I will copy this to post to people who missed it. All right.
Sharing now. You can see me, you can hear me, we're ready to go. Well, Scott, thanks for the invitation. It's a topic I really do like to talk about, and I hope to share some of that excitement with you and maybe even convince you how important standards are for the profession. That would be kind of my other goal for the night. So we're going to talk about the new ISO standard for L&D measurement, bring you up to speed on that, give you enough information so you can share with others, maybe decide whether you want to buy a copy for yourself, and maybe think about what it means to be a true profession. So by way of introduction, founder and former executive director of the Center for Talent Reporting. That was the home of TDRP that some of you are familiar with, 15 years old now, as Scott and I were talking about a minute ago. Before that, the founder and former president of Caterpillar University. Before that, the chief economist for Caterpillar, author of 3 books there, teaching some executive ed and PhD programs. And most importantly for tonight's topic, a member of the ISO work group on metrics, and I led the effort to create this standard. So it's a pleasure to be able to talk about it with you. I'm going to get my chat back up just in case anything comes through there. I don't always catch it in real time, but I'll try. So today's discussion. I want to introduce you to ISO if you're not familiar with it and this new standard. Talk for just a little bit about the process of creating a standard in case you've never been involved with an ISO standard before. And then take you through the key components. Obviously, we'll spend some time on those recommended metrics, but also I want to share the different types of reports that are included in the ISO standard. Then talk a little bit about how to use the standard. So that's my goal for the next hour. And I will keep my eye on chat if you have something you want answered as we go along. I understand we'll have some time at the end for questions as well. So why do we need this? Because it took us in ISO a lot of time and effort to produce this. Well, here's what I think. I think we really need a classification framework for measures and reports, going beyond the Kirkpatrick-Phillips 5 levels, a framework across all aspects of measurement. We need a common language. We need to agree around the world on names for measures, definitions for them, formulas for them. And we haven't been there previously. We're getting close, but we don't have that common language or framework. And I think that's really important. We need a starting list of metrics for consideration. How often does someone say, where should I begin? What metrics should I focus on first? So let's give you that. And then let's give you what you need to create a measurement and reporting strategy. So the benefit would be, as a profession, to give us that common language and framework. And when you think about other professions and maybe what makes them a profession, if you think about accounting, which was our inspiration for TDRP 15 years ago, they have 4 types of measures. They have defined all their measures. They have defined what reports measures go into. In the sciences, we have a periodic table for chemistry. People aren't making that stuff up anymore. They go to the periodic table. Biology has classified all living organisms. Mature professions that have been around for hundreds of years have common language and framework. In learning and HR in general, we are not there yet. We are not a mature profession. I'd like us to be, and maybe with your help, we can take the next little step towards that. All of this makes it easier for us to talk among each other, to select and define and calculate metrics here, provide guidance on them, but it'll also dramatically improve the quality of benchmarking, because right now when ATD puts out their annual survey, which becomes the industry benchmarking survey, people are giving them however they define things, and it's not always the same. Cost would be one great example where I know we have inconsistency in reporting. So this will really help us be much better and have much better results. And it will also, I think, contribute to the sustainability of measurement. A lot of measurement efforts start off and they fizzle out. And I think part of that is because there isn't this common language, common framework, and you need that to instill it in an organization. So that's why I think this was important. ISO, International Organization for Standardization, independent non-government international organization made up of 173 national standards bodies. Most countries have a standards body. In the United States, it's ANSI, probably familiar with that. And through its member organizations, ISO brings together experts in all the different fields to create voluntary consensus-based standards, applying to products, services, a whole host. In fact, since ISO was created in 1945, it has created almost 26,000 standards. It's been a busy group. There are 828 technical committees that oversee the development of standards. And we just got our first one for human resource management. It's called TC for Technical Committee 260. And that got going, about 11 or 12 years ago now. So pretty much brand new in this effort. Of course, you can learn more about ISO if you're curious. We got some links there. But just diving into the relevant standards from our purposes. The first standard to come out of TC 260 back in 2018, but just updated about 3 weeks ago, which is why 25 is in the parentheses there because there's a new version out now, was the groundbreaking guidelines for internal and external human capital reporting. Now, if you don't know about that, that might be of interest to you as well. The new version has about 69 metrics in it. Some of those recommendation is they should be reported to the public, and the rest are to be used internally. And if you're not familiar with that, and if you're at all curious about reporting, then you might get a copy of that. That included 8 metrics related to L&D. So we put a team together in our own working group 2 within TC 260, and back in 21 published the skills and capabilities cluster. We took those 59 metrics in the 2018 one, divided them into about 11 clusters, and then I led one of those clusters, and we came up with 3428. In there, you'll find in-depth descriptions of how to calculate 5 L&D measures. Cost is one of those. So that was the first one, but only covering 5, but in great detail. 3422 came out in 22, and that covered learning at a high level in general. Maybe a standard you want to give a person brand new to learning. It's only about 20 pages, talks about needs analysis, the big picture, but it did mention the 3 types of measures: outcome, effectiveness, and efficiency. They left it to a different working group, the one I was in then, to build out all the metrics that we need in learning. And so that brings us to 3437, published in June of 23, a little more than 2 years ago now, subject of our discussion tonight. That's how we got to where we are. So this 3437, learning and development metrics. TS stands for technical specification, has to be reviewed every 3 years. A higher level standard, which didn't require experts to form it, can go for 5 years. Was created to support 3422, but it was a result of 2 years of work by TC 260, working group 2 on metrics. The countries most involved, you see in front of you there, US, Canada, UK, and Australia. But I also think it's important for you to, whoops, didn't want to do that. Also important just to have a feel for what is involved in creating a technical specification. So if someone were to ask you, they've heard about this, and should they take it seriously, or was it just one person putting down on paper what they thought it should be? No, it isn't. You have to start with a new work item proposal, and you have to have 5 countries agree before you can even submit it that it seems worth doing. So we did that in May of 21. Then it has to circulate those 173 national bodies for them to approve it and provide initial comments on why they think it's going to be worthwhile and things they want to make sure you take into consideration. So they did approve our moving forward. We formed a subgroup within working group 2, which has about 35 members. We formed a group of about 7. That's the group that I led. Came up with a first draft, We relied a lot on TDRP, so it was nice to see that flow through. But the group basically took it apart, and then we all put it back together again. Eventually presented a draft to the full working group, and they took it apart and gave us marching orders to do this different, change that, incorporate this. So back to the drawing board once again. And then when it came out of working group 2, once again, then it is submitted to all 173 countries. And we got 24 pages of detailed comments, and we have to address every single comment and let the world know whether we agree, don't agree, what we're going to do with it. So ISO is all about this disciplined, slow, takes forever to get anything done approach. But when you do get it done, then you've got global consensus, and you have been forced to consider things you otherwise wouldn't have thought of. So we took into account all that, made the changes, and then sent it off for publication. So that's what goes into a standard. If it were a full standard without the TS, it would have gone back to the world one more time for a vote. And that's why that only has to be approved every 5 years, but this one is approved every 3 years. So what's in this thing? 52 metrics for large organizations. ISO always recognizes that it's easier for large organizations to meet standards than smaller ones because they have more staff, more resource. Wouldn't be fair to expect that small companies can do as much as large ones. Recommendations are going to be made by type of user to make it easy to use and by type of metric. Recommendations are also going to include informal learning metrics because more organizations are using those. And here I'm thinking about organized informal learning, like performance support tools, like communities of practice, like coaching, mentoring. Definitions provided for all 52. So the preferred name and the definition and the formula, and in most cases, an example of how it's used in a table. Again, to get everyone around the world on the same page. So we don't have to keep reinventing the wheel. And so we can eliminate any debates that still occur in organizations over definitions of metrics. This is a waste of time. Now we've got an international standard. Let's just adopt it and stop making up our own definitions. So the key components in this are 5 categories of users in order to make it easy for people to use, 4 broad reasons to measure, 3 types of measures, and 4 types of reports. And like I said, you're going to find recommendations by user and by type of metric. And I'll show you what the table in the standard looks like so you can decide for yourself. And as I said, it's going to have definitions. I've just copied one out for you, the completion rate here, just to give you an example of what the definition would look like and how it's used in a table to give maybe some examples of some nuances in using completion rate. And then sample reports. And I'll show you some examples of the sample reports you can find in the standard as well. We wanted to make sure that this really was going to be easy to use. The user experience was very, very important here. And we worked hard to try to make it easy to use. Like I said, if you're familiar with TDRP, this is a TDRP framework, not in the standard, but you'll see how a lot of this framework comes through, but not all of it, and some has changed. So that's what I meant by we start someplace. You always start with something, and then you take it apart and put it back together better, stronger, more comprehensive than it was before. So what's this framework? The 5 types of users. Senior organization leader, that'd be like the CEO or CFO. Group or team leader would be another level down in your organization. Maybe a department head, regional leader, business unit head. And then we have to be responsive to whatever you want to call the head of training, CLO, VP of training. Of course, program managers, those responsible for designing, developing, making sure programs are delivered, making sure they're managed properly. That's the program manager, whatever you might call it in an organization. And they'll need their own metrics. And last, your employees, the individual learners, what would they like to see? So The standard says start by knowing who your users are, and now you've got a mental model, a framework for keeping track of them in your mind, because they're not all going to have the same need. They're all not going to want the same list of measures. So here's a way we can break it into 5 groups, not too many, can almost remember all 5 categories. And then you'll be able to look up in the standard the metrics that are recommended for each of these groups. So start by knowing who your users are and then why they want the measures. If someone said, can you get this measure for me? Don't just say yes, happy to. Talk with them. Why do you want it? What are you going to do with it? They don't know learning as well as you do. There may be a better measure for them. They don't know to ask for it. So you want to make sure that they're going to get really what they need. So again, a mental model here, a framework would be helpful. So we can categorize not only who that learner is, but why they want it. So we come up with 4 broad reasons to measure. You can come up with a list of 15, but that's too hard to use in a model. No one can remember 15. I can remember 4. So inform is when you just answer questions. Someone wants to know how many courses there were, how many people took the course, how many completions there were. That's informing. Monitoring is when you go a step beyond that. And you take a look at your history, the actual results over the years. And if you're trying to figure out whether the incoming data for level 1 participant reaction or level 3 application seems to be in the right ballpark, maybe you've looked at history and maybe historically you've always gotten 90% or more favorable in your level 1 feedback. And so you set that as a threshold and then you monitor against that threshold. You've gotten it in the past, why wouldn't you get it in the future? So that's monitoring. When you set a threshold up and you're going to compare the incoming data to the threshold. The threshold was achieved historically. Program evaluation is where all the books have been written about. The Phillips have written 70 books themselves. Kirkpatrick's have written several. Others have written books as well. So we have over 100 books in our profession about program evaluation. There are no books about informing or monitoring, but there are 100 books about program evaluation, where you want to determine how successful that program was. And then last, manage. So manage is the most complex and highest level reason to measure. Many are not managing today. They're informing, they're monitoring, they're starting to do program evaluation. Managing goes beyond monitoring, because in managing, you select a plan or a target that you want to achieve going ahead. This will be above and beyond anything you've done before. Maybe you've reached 10,000 employees in the past. You want to reach 12,000. Maybe in the past, the highest, the best program had an application rate of 65%. You want to push that to 80. So you want to go above and beyond where you've ever been before. So you're not monitoring anymore. You've never been there before. You're setting up a target. You're going to have to think about what it's going to take to achieve that. You're going to have to probably give people special responsibilities, maybe new roles to help achieve that, more budget, maybe more staff. So you got to think through what's going to be required to achieve it, because it's not going to happen just because you set up a plan. It's going to have to be, so take some hard work to deliver that. And that's going to take a special type of report, as we'll see in a minute. Anyway, you want to understand, coming away from an annual discussion with a user, about why they want to measure, what they're going to do with it. So understand the reasons for measuring. That will help you not only select the right measure for them, but dictate the frequency that you need to share the value of the measure back with them. And it turns out the most appropriate type of report. So for the first time, we'll be tying the type of report to the reason to measure, to give guidance on what a good report would be. Third, we have a framework for the types of measures. I'm sure you're more familiar with this, at least the efficiency and effectiveness metrics. Although a lot of people have also been using the outcome metrics as a third bucket for metrics for the last 25 years now. And we did at TDRP as well. We have, well, at CTR, we have 200 L&D metrics in our library. So we have a lot of L&D metrics, about 700 to 1,000 metrics for HR in general, far more than accounting. So we have a lot of metrics. You could organize them alphabetically, but that's not very helpful. It'd be much more helpful, especially for communication purposes, to put them into groups of like categories. And so we have efficiency measures. They're about quantity. That would be your level 0 measures, activity, cost, utilization rates. But you'd always want to balance those out with quality measures. We not only want a lot of courses, we want good courses. So we want quality. Those are effectiveness measures. Levels 1, 2, 3, and 5. But I've not left 4 out by mistake. Rather, we've moved that into its own category called outcome metrics. It's like the what's in it for me, the reason you probably ran this program to begin with. It'll always have individual outcomes, and sometimes you'll have organizational outcomes. So that's our level 4, outcomes. And level 4 is so important. It's what CEOs most want to see from their learning department and are least likely to get. That we have broken it out and put it in its own category so it's easier for us to talk about it and make recommendations about when to include outcomes and when not to. So now we can handle all these metrics we have. Now this standard's only going to handle 52 of them. In our book, Measurement Demystified, we cover about 110 and not all the 200. You have to start someplace. So we'll be starting with 52 in the standard. And then last, the 4 types of reports. And it turns out, as I said, the recommended report depends on the reason for measuring. So use a scorecard to inform or monitor. When someone's just asking to see the data, then a scorecard may be just what they're asking for, especially if they want it in detail, like by week, by month. They want a spreadsheet full of numbers. Okay, Excel's great for that. Dashboard has a visual display. Might have pie charts, bar graphs on it, line graphs. Not as much data. The data it does have might be year to date or more aggregate data. So less data may be better for managers who aren't lost in the detail, more visually appealing, won't fall asleep looking at it necessarily. But again, only to be used if the reason to measure was to inform or monitor. Both of those are cases where we are looking backwards, looking back at the results, looking out the rear view window of your car, if you will. So they're great for seeing where you've been. And it's always good to know where you're coming from. But it tells you nothing about the road ahead, nothing about where you're going. So informing and monitoring, using scorecards and dashboards to tell about the past, about history. Program evaluation reports would be the format of report used when you're done with the program and ready to brief its results, to share how good it turned out to be. I'll show you an example of that in a minute. And then management reports. Management reports are forward-looking. They'll have a column or two that also are backward-looking, but they're going to have a forward look, including a forecast for how you're likely to end the program or end the year if no special action is taken. So the important parts of a management report are going to be forward-looking. And that's what you need to manage to higher levels of metrics than you've ever achieved before, because it's not going to be simple and something's always going to go wrong. And you want to be alerted as soon as possible that you're no longer on track to deliver what you promised. So you can take corrective action early in the fiscal year and get back on track. So it's a whole different kind of report. You cannot use scorecards and dashboards to manage. You can use it to share where you've been, but they're not designed to manage. So it's a special report format. Well, just to be sure we're on the same page here, here's what I mean by scorecard. So we've used these forever. Here's what I mean by dashboard. Obviously, dashboard takes more time to customize, although my hope is with AI, this can be almost automated. So I have high hopes for AI making dashboards much easier to do so more people can do them, because you have to work with the goal owner, the stakeholder, whoever wants the information about what they want to see in what form. If you're going to monitor, you need to put a threshold or a legend in. You need to look at history, see what you normally have accomplished before, like LMS uptime. We'd been good about getting to 99%, so I set that as the threshold. I want to stay in the green. I've been there before. I want to stay in the green. But the yellow or red will tell me if I'm falling out of it. And a format like this is easy to use because your eyes always go to the red. And the person issuing it, knowing your eyes will go to the red, will be ready to explain why it's in the red and what they're doing about it to get out of the red. So this is an example of monitoring. You've been there before. You want to make sure you can stay there. Elements of a program evaluation report. It's like a briefing report. A lot of organizations have their own template, their own outline for this. The military does a great job in after action reviews. That's all this is a set format. And you would start by reminding people what the need was, what the goal was. Why did we do this? And then what was our plan to accomplish the goal, to move the needle? And include the targets or goals for all the key efficiency, effectiveness, and outcome measures. And now with the plan laid out, share how it turned out. What were the results? And then some lessons learned, because there's always something to be learned. Which one of these is most common in L&D? Scott, that's a great question. I've asked this in many presentations I've made, and people say inform, but they may be assuming that, like collecting completion rate data, is informing, and maybe depending on how you use it, it is. But if you think of all the tables that people are producing, like scorecards, which is where I think still most of the L&D resources for measurement and reporting go, that falls into the inform category. That's what we're doing. We're sharing a whole lot of information, basically without context. It's just the data, please, and no value judgment about the values of the data. If you were to consider completion rate as a starting point for program evaluation, then maybe the percentage moves a little bit more towards program evaluation. So somewhere between informing and maybe program evaluation, but definitely not managing. So working our way through in just 3 slides, just to give you how simple it is, of a program evaluation report. What is this? It's the sales training initiative. Why do we do it? Well, to help the company achieve its goal of 8% higher sales. And we and the head of sales agreed up front in partnership that learning would have a role to play. Now, by providing training to the sales consultants, would that get us all the way to 8%? Of course not. But could it get us 1/4 of the way there? Could learning be responsible for 2% higher sales? Something else, the economy, hiring more salespeople, will get the other 6%. But could learning get us 1/4 of the way there? We both thought it could. So we've committed to that as a goal. That is our goal for a level 4 outcome measure. We're going to try to hit that. The plan to achieve that 2% higher sales then is to provide a 3-day consultative selling skills course, provide a 2-day new product features course, get them both done early in the fiscal year so they have plenty of time to have impact before the fiscal year runs out. The SVP of sales and supervisors in that department have a big role to play, not only in making subject matter experts available to us, but in communicating why people need to take this training. It's going to be mandatory. They will have to make sure their people take it. And then once they get back from the class, it's up to the supervisors to reinforce the learning with help and prompts from us in learning. So it's a partnership. They aren't our employees, and we can't make them do anything. Their boss can. So it's going to be a partnership. Whatever result we get is going to be due to the efforts of both of us, not the L&D department alone, but to both of us. And we've got a cost pan. We said we can do this for $150,000. So if we're presenting now to the CEO, the CFO, your governing body, here is the plan. Now, how did it turn out? Well, good news. Both courses completed on time. Expectations were clearly communicated. by the salespeople. They did their job, and they also did an incredible job reinforcing the learning when they got back. So you want to heap praise on your partners. Don't take it all yourself. And the cost came in a little less. That's a good thing. Both courses were well received. Almost everyone found them worthwhile. They'd recommend them to others. We know that came from our level 1 questions, but they don't need to know what level 1 is. Some of the sample feedback came out of our level 1 survey as well. Some people would rather see anecdotes than numbers. We'll give it to them both ways. But now let's get to the business results. So the training results, levels 1 through 3, level 0, they were good. But what did it do for the business? Well, customer surveys already show a market improvement. Close rates are already up. Price realization is already up. Our courses were designed in part to give both of those a boost, which would then lead to higher sales. And in fact, sales are up 7%. The fiscal year hasn't ended yet, but it's already up 7% since the end of the course. So things are looking good. In fact, based on where we are now and the momentum coming out of these courses, the SVP of Sales expects sales to increase 9% for the year, slightly beating plan, and learning has played a role in that. In fact, looking back, we think we've met that target we set for ourselves, that learning will contribute at least 2% of that 9%. That should result in $2.1 million in additional sales and additional profit, even after subtracting all the costs involved in the training, giving us a very nice ROI of 40%. So there you have the results. I would conclude with some lessons learned so they know that we don't know everything and we're not perfect. We learned some things too, or had some learning reinforced. So that you have it in 3 or 4 slides. That's what we mean by a briefing document, a template to step people through. And you can see how much more powerful this is than just using like the last scorecard or dashboard you had before the program ended. So much more powerful, tells a much more powerful story than you're going to tell with a scorecard or a dashboard. Last, a program evaluation report. In case you've never seen one of these, this is what they look like. And oh, by the way, this is exactly what manufacturing and sales use in organizations. This is what people used at Caterpillar, for instance. So in TDRP, we just adopted this for learning. And I so thought, this is a good idea. So you've got the plan, which is the forward-looking part. We're going to compare our year-to-date results to the plan. And then you've got a forecast column. So each month, you're going to update this, given your latest thinking and what you've learned so far. And you're going to set numbers out there for the forecast. And if it looks like those are not going to hit plan, you stop and ask yourselves, why is that? Why are we falling short? Is there anything we can do to get back on plan? Even if it takes additional resources or staff, maybe the CLO can arrange for us to have the additional staff we need if we underestimated the effort it was going to take to pull this off. So this is how you manage programs or manage manufacturing or manage sales to make sure that you deliver what you promised the CEO and the board of directors by the end of the year, because you do not want to disappoint them. And you know, I probably do this for your strategic learning programs. And you might only have a handful of these each year. At Caterpillar, we had about 10. This isn't the majority of your learning. This is only that very special learning that can directly contribute to accomplishing one of the goals of your CEO or head of HR. So that's an example of a program report, just to give you an idea. All right, so now we've got the framework set. You know what we mean by the different types of reports. Let's get into the metrics. And a lot of people want the standard for the metrics, but that's not the only thing that's in the standard. So we are going to consider the size of the organization. There isn't going to be a single list that works for everybody, for every type of user. Why would you think that? Organizations are different, users are different, so you've got to be able to customize it. And this is designed to customize it. We're going to have a smaller list of 19 metrics recommended for small and medium-sized organizations. But that's also a great starting point for anyone, and you can use this as a checklist. If you're a larger organization, you're already pretty mature, wonderful. You probably can check off all 19, and then you can go on to the other 33 that make up the 52. But if you're a small organization just starting, A small organization that may not have even one person dedicated to measurement. Then this is a starting point for you. And it's a starting point that's doable, that's not incredibly overwhelming like 52 would be. You might imagine you can get to 19 in 2 or 3 years. 19 metrics spread out on the left by type of user. We're always going to have the most recommended for the head of learning. At Caterpillar as CLO, I wanted to see everything. I wanted to see what was going on in the programs, going on for learning ops, and I wanted to see the metrics that we'd be sharing with the senior leaders in the company before they saw them. So I'm looking up, I'm looking down, I'm looking sideways. I always want the most. By type of metric, to start out, no outcome metrics, not because they aren't important. I would say they are the most important, but we can't start people there. They are complicated. They're hard to calculate. So let's start people with the basics. Let's get the foundation set with our efficiency metrics and our starting effectiveness metrics. And we're not going to have any for informal learning to start with. Let's just get started with formal learning and those kind of metrics that work no matter what kind of learning it is. So we're going to start with smaller numbers. Please don't stop there, but we can start there to not overwhelm anyone. And then we've got the 52. 52 now has 47 that might be of interest to the head of learning, 19 that might be of interest to a CEO. And now over on the right-hand side, we've got 3 different types of outcome metrics that would be of interest to some of these users. We've got 40 efficiency metrics, including some for informal learning. And we've got 9 effectiveness metrics. So the world has become much more complex now. So again, start simple, start small, start with a 19. When you've got those pretty much mastered, then you can take a look at the others and continue to mature, continue to advance. So what do these lists look like? Here's how it looks. This is the table from the ISO standard. And you can see across the top, it's organized by the type of user. So that if your CEO were to call up and say, I'd like to start seeing some learning metrics. I think I should know what they are. Would you please recommend some for me and start to give them to me every quarter? Well, now if you get that phone call or email, you pull out the standard and just look in the column for senior leader. Pull out these metrics. Take them back to the senior leader, show how they might be used in a table, and say, ISO has recommended these that they think most CEOs would like to see. What do you think? And your CEO may say, oh, nice starting point. And this comes from ISO. And you'd say, yes, it does. And they'd say, oh, I didn't know. And then they look at the list a little bit more and they'd say, you know, here's one. I don't care about that. And you'd say, fine, I'll take it off. And then your CEO might say, and don't you have something that isn't on this list? And you say, oh, yeah, we've got that. I'll add it. The point is, the ISO standard is meant to be a starting point. So take that list as a starting point to your CEO or to your program manager or to whomever and say, here is what a global body thinks people in your position would be interested in. But you know, we have more, and I'll show you the extensive list. You can choose to add some more. And if there's some of these you don't think are appropriate for our company or we're not ready for them yet, I get it. We won't share those with you right now. But you've got a starting point. All right. So this is a pretty basic one, like number of participants. You all know the difference. If I'm one person, I take 3 courses in the year. I'm one unique participant, but 3 total participants. It's like enrollments. There's 3 enrollments for one person. And you want to report them both because they answer different questions. Employees reached by learning, I think, is a great measure. And my CEO at Caterpillar always was curious about, are we reaching all of our employees at Caterpillar? And I think most CEOs would be. Ditto, having individual development plans. Most aspire to everyone having one. Total cost, you should know what you're spending on learning. Pretty basic stuff. And then average formal training hours. In the old days, it was 40 hours. I never believed that, never subscribed to that. That's a different discussion, but it's a common metric. So measure that. And then on effectiveness measures, start with level 1. Don't stop there, but start there. And if you're going to do that, be sure you ask questions, as we'll see in a minute, about some of the more powerful level 1 questions. Anyway, you see how it can be used. So very handy, easy to use. People just look it up and use that as a starting point. And then you can leaf back to the last half of the standard, which is where you find the definition and formula and example of that being used in a report. So you got everything you need right there in the standard. Okay, you're a bigger organization, or you're just curious if you're a smaller one, what you can aspire to, what else is there for you. Okay, now we've got outcome metrics. And here, just giving you examples of impact of learning. So whether it's Kirkpatrick results or the Phillips impact, and you can apply that to whatever area it's in. You can apply it to sales, productivity, retention rate, employee engagement, whatever it is. But it's that type of measure, trying to get to that business result or isolated impact, which almost everyone would be interested in knowing. Also, workforce competency rate. To me, competency rates or skill rates are kind of someplace between level 3 and level 4. It's a little more than application, but maybe not quite yet to directly producing 2% higher sales, but still someplace in there. And these all started back in 2015, and we hadn't gotten into the skills craze yet. You know, in the last 3 years, like 20 years ago, we had the competency craze, then it went away. Now the skills craze has come. Some still believe skills is different than competency. You might have your own opinion about that. But anyway, now it's you can replace that competency with skills if you want. Individual skill level or the workforce skill level. So those are different kinds of outcome metrics, something beyond level 3. And then efficiency metrics, yes, the basic ones. But here we're beginning to get into some others down here at the bottom, and especially on the right-hand side of the slide. We've got a lot more of the learning ops type metrics, especially would be of interest to the CLO. Courses available, courses used, hours available, hours used. These are the things that make up the benchmarking reports that ATD puts out. Those reports don't actually contain any effectiveness measures. They're all efficiency measures, and they're the learning ops kinds of efficiency measures. So they're in there. And we start picking up informal learning metrics for at least documents available in your portal. I'm not talking about courses now in your LMS, but content, videos available in your portals, communities of practice for knowledge sharing, performance support tools. So all those are measurable, and effectiveness measures. So now we go beyond level 1 and also recommend levels 2, 3, 4, 2, 3, and 5. And for informal learning, to begin to measure user satisfaction. Of course, it won't be event-based because you drive people nuts with informal learning, doing it after every event, but maybe an annual or semi-annual survey where you'd ask people, have you ever used any of these types of organized informal learning, a branching survey? And if yes, go to the one they've been using, ask about how much they've used it, and then ask what they thought about it. Was it easy to use? Did they find what they wanted? We had 4,000 communities of practice at Caterpillar. It was a very important way of learning that was not formal learning. Okay, I just want to take a little bit deeper dive into the effectiveness measures. I think you know what most of those efficiency measures are, or can guess from their name probably what they are. I just want to make sure we're on the same page with regard to these effectiveness measures and the outcome measure. And then we'll turn our attention back to some reports. So 5 effectiveness metrics recommended for the larger organizations. There's just one for the smaller ones. But the participant reaction is where we all start. Level 1, and we've been measuring this in the profession forever, but we won't make the mistake of claiming that is how success is determined, because it tells you nothing about success. So why do we do it? We do it to see if there's any issues that we need to correct before offering the course again. Now, key questions, in addition to questions on the content and the instructor and the environment, are, would you recommend this to others, and was it a worthwhile investment? Because those do correlate more closely with level 3 and level 4. So those are the power questions. You want to make sure you have those 2 questions in your list of survey questions. 5 or 7 point Likert scale recommended, not an even scale. The standard talks about how to report the results, either as a percentage favorable, like the top 2 boxes, or as an average score. Again, kind of bring together all the basics you would need to get started here. So that's participant reaction. But how about goal owner surveys, a different type of level 1, which can have a big payback for little effort? This would be questions you ask, especially those strategic goal owners, like the head of sales you were working with to increase sales. So when you're all done with those programs for them, don't you want to know what they think of you? They're talking about you behind your back. So why not ask them? How are we to work with? Do we deliver on time? Do we deliver on budget? Would you recommend us to your colleagues? Do it in SurveyMonkey. Maybe even add an open-ended question of any improvements you would recommend for us. When I started doing this at Caterpillar, I learned a lot that they were willing to tell me in a survey, but not face-to-face for whatever funny reason. So learned a lot from these. That's level 1, objective owner satisfaction. Level 2, learning. Determine if the participants are required the required knowledge, obviously important for compliance training, for legal records. But beyond that, there's other types of learning where you want them to acquire some basic skills or knowledge, and it's testable. So you have a question, or you have other ways to get at that. So maybe measure by percentage passing on the final attempt, maybe even looking at how many pass it on the first attempt if you want to gauge maybe how good your test questions are, whether they can understand them or not. So we've got level 2, but we're all pretty familiar with that. Level 3 application is where the profession has a lot of opportunity here, because most are still not doing this for the majority of their training. So it represents, to me, the biggest single opportunity, along with moving to management, that we have in the learning profession. Want to see if participants can apply what they learned. You can measure this at 2 points in time. Intent to apply right at the end of the course in your post-event survey. And actual application, if you can, 2 to 3 months later in a follow-up survey. Now, for short courses, your mini learning, if there's only one learning objective, maybe you can ask a question like, I was able to apply the content from this course. And they'll know what you're talking about, and they can answer that. But when it gets very long, especially multiple days, multiple learning objectives, a better way to do it is ask about the percentage of content applied. And you can use a decile scale for that. And you can automate that even in SurveyMonkey. And this will give you a much better read on the application, because no one in a long course is going to apply 100% of it. So don't you want to know how much they could apply? So why wouldn't we all be doing this? You can get the intent to apply by simply adding one more question to your existing post-event survey. Everyone is doing post-event surveys to find out if they liked the course. Add one more question, add a level 3 question, and now you've got intent to apply. Even if you never make it to actual application, intent to apply is a leading indicator, and you can take action on it immediately. You don't have to wait 3 months to find out they're not applying it. So it's knowledge you'd want to have, I would think, for every type of course you do, including compliance training. So that's in the standard as well. And then ROI, if you're following the Phillips approach and you isolate the impact of learning at level 4, then you can calculate this as well. Some of you are familiar with that. There's a lot to be learned from the Phillips there, but fairly straightforward calculation. Here, the purpose is to determine if it was all worthwhile, because after all, they could have had the right people in the audience, they completed it on time, they liked it, they learned it, They applied it. It had impact, but you spent more on it than it was worth. It has a negative ROI. You've got to change something before offering that again. So level 4 doesn't tell you whether it was worthwhile. And this is Phillips' insight when he came along and modified level 4 and added level 5. Kirkpatrick never got close to that. So if you want to answer that question, then you've got to go to level 5. And if you want to go to level 5, you're going to have to use the Phillips approach to level 4 and not the Kirkpatrick. Kirkpatrick came first. Well, Fitzell came before Kirkpatrick, but Kirkpatrick built on his results and came up with the steps which became the levels. And Kirkpatrick results are the change in the business measure. So if you did learning for sales and sales went up 10%, the Kirkpatrick result, the business result, is a 10% increase in sales. And he would have a compelling chain of evidence linking results back to the learning. So you might be able to show that the learning was designed to improve close rates and price realization, and you can show clearly that it did. And the logic model would say if it did that, then it should lead to higher sales. Or you might look at all the different levels, and you might say, I got the level 0, I got the level 1, they liked it, level 2, they learned it, level 3, they applied it. One way or another, you can tell a story, a compelling story, that learning played a role, but you're not going to try to determine how large that role was. That's what Phillips came along and did different. He says, I want to know what percent of that 10% was due just to learning. Kirkpatrick says, don't go there. Phillips says, I'm going, and has 6 different methods to isolate the impact of learning. He wants to know out of that 10% increase in sales, whether it was 2% higher sales or 3% higher sales. The most common method is participant estimation, and that is included in the ISO standard. If anyone's curious about that, I'd be happy, and I included some slides in the appendix. I'd be happy to share that during the Q&A if you want me to take you through participant estimation or any of the isolation methods. But I want to be sure we have time to get through like the rest of the reports and answer any other general questions you might have about the standard too. So I said the standard would include sample reports, and it's got sample reports for each type of user. So for example, here's a sample report for a senior leader. So if that senior leader is called up and said, I'd like you to recommend for me some measures and give me a report showing how I might look at these. Now, he might want to see them every quarter, but we've just developed some annual reports here. And for this company, they have goals to increase sales, reduce injuries, increase productivity, and improve employee engagement. So those are 4 outcomes you've designed learning to help accomplish. So naturally, you're going to want to share the results, and we're going to share the isolated impact here of learning on that. We can also show a lot of level of those post-event surveys ask about increasing performance. You might want to try to use that, as well as showing some improvement in competency or skill levels. You'll notice I show you results here that looks a little funny. We have a 4,1, and down here we have a 2 space 546. This is the European number standard. ISO is located in Geneva, Switzerland. So we're using the British type English in these ISO standards like OUR instead of OR. And 4,1 would be 4.1 to us in North America. 0,2 is 0.2. Down here, 2,546 is 2,546. The comma would mean a decimal point, so you don't want to stick a comma in there. So anyway, that's how you read the numbers. And then you want to have some effectiveness numbers, because if you just look at that column for a large organization, these are the measures that have X's in the column for senior leader. So it's as simple as just making up a report with whatever had an X in it, and then get the data for it. And then share it back and remind the CEO, this is what ISO recommended as a starting point for us to share with you. So a senior leader might like a scorecard like that. A program manager might like a scorecard like this, or if you're sharing the results of a program, just in the data, you might share results something like this. So here's one that's kind of in progress here. And you would not use this to manage, but you can use it to look back to inform, because any scorecard is used to inform, not to manage. But outcome, impact of learning on sales. This is a program manager report for the program or programs to increase sales. So how are we doing? Well, so far we got 1% higher sales. Now, if it's only to inform, there is no plan. You'll get that in the management report in a minute, but there isn't a plan. But still, it's nice that sales are up. Improvement in performance, competency assessment, it's growing. So, okay, that's good. Effectiveness, level 1, level 2, level 3. I've got both intent and actual application here, where I have the data. I've got unique participant data. I've got cost data. So, again, where did I get these measures? Why did I pick those? It's because it's what the standard says. It's what the team believed would be a good starting point. Head of learning. This has the most measures. It always will. And I always wanted to know more than this at Caterpillar. So it's got a lot of those that we've looked at in the last 2 types of reports, plus a few more. Learning ops type measures. Courses available, courses used. Unique hours available, unique hours used. Total hours used. Utilization rate type measures. Measures for type of learning. What's my percent of e-learning doing? What's my percent of VILT doing? All interesting to know. Okay, so examples. How about the individual employee? Not to forget them. A lot of you, or you might work for organizations that are developing customized portals for their employees to see. Their employees don't need to know what LMS they're using. They just go into their learning portal. And wouldn't it be nice in your learning portal to see a record of courses completed? And a lot of learning portals have exactly that. Also, what are you enrolled in, but you haven't finished it yet? And also, what are some other required courses that you haven't gotten to yet? And oh, by the way, what are some discretionary courses that you or you and your supervisor believe would be good for you? Wouldn't it be nice as an employee to see all of that? On the right-hand side, how about capturing the completion date for your development plan, which can be picked up by your corporate system yet? How about your membership in communities of practice? So how about your organization, if you not only assign some learning, but you assign them to be a member in a community of practice where they can get answers to their questions 24/7 without having to take any course at all? How about performance support tools that you encourage them to use based on their interest? How about the online content accessed? And how about that skill or competency assessment? They're coming out of accounting. They're already pretty good at that. They're getting a little bit better. But this person would like to move over to finance. Right now, at a level of 2, they aren't competent enough. They're not going to even get hired into an introductory position in finance. But if they take some finance courses, maybe in a year, they'd be at the minimum required proficiency level to get a job in finance. Well, so there's an example of measures used in a portal for an individual learner.
So, Dave,
Yeah.
would there
Yeah.
be like badges or certificates? Would that be on this individual scorecard? Like,
Oh, I hadn't even thought of that. I should have. Indeed, yes. You should have a list of your badges and certificates. I'll put that in the next revision to this.
because yeah,
That's a great
in the
idea.
Coast Guard, it's kind of an outcome. Is like after you take a course, you need to complete some other things to get your PQS certification, competency,
Uh-huh.
whatever. And so it'd probably be a level 4 metric of people that have achieved that outcome, but it also could be for the learner. which ones you've achieved.
Right. Yeah,
Okay.
something like that that's great. And any feedback like that now before we end or afterwards, if you think of something, I'd love to hear it. Because as I said to begin with, this type of standard is reviewed every 3 years, which means it's up for review next year. So we get to make changes. And it's really important after we socialize this for the first 3 years to take all that we've heard, because you're never perfect. And your first one, when you look back, is never as good as you wished it would have been. But you've got to start somewhere. And will only get better if everyone has comments like Scott just made and said, hey, how about this? Should we add that in there? And that's how these are going to get better. That's where the input comes from for that next round of revision.
Are you on the team for the revision coming up next year then?
I will. I am, yeah.
Okay, great.
Yeah. So the ISO standard, hopefully it's providing that common language, that framework. Hopefully it's simplifying things. It doesn't need to be as hard as it is. Not to say there aren't some things that are complex, because there are. And that's why I put off that isolation methodology for a minute. So that there are some things that are complex. But it isn't as hard as a lot of people think it is. And it'd just be better, easier, if we had this common language. If everyone were using that, if all the books, all the webinars, all the workshops, if everyone were using a common language and common framework, it'd be so much easier, especially for people new to the profession. If you've been in it for a while, you can kind of translate it in your mind. They called it X, but I know they mean Y. But new people don't know that. It's all confusing to them. Like, why don't these people use a common language? So we should do that. And begin to use the 5 types of users and the 4 reasons to measure. And share sample reports back. When you first talk to someone, if they ask for some measures, come back to them and say, here are the measures I think you would want to see based on what I heard from you. And by the way, here are some report formats for us to share them with you. Would you look at these? What do you think? Do you like this format or do you like this format? If it's this format, would you like it exactly like that, or should we change something? So you can best meet their needs. Use the guidance from ISO as a starting point in your own selection of measures. And begin to use the reporting framework. So now, for the first time, you have guidance on what type of report to use depending on the reason to measure. So in summary, this provides that framework we wanted to provide. It gives you the definitions, the preferred names. And our hope is that this technical specification will provide the guidance and standardization for us to mature further as a profession, to become more professional, to kind of have what accounting has and have what chemistry and physics and biology have. So we'd like us to get to that same level of maturity. So again, published back in 2023. Yes, ISO needs to sell it. No, they don't pay any of us who worked on it. In fact, sometimes we had to pay them for the privilege of spending our time working on it. But they have their overhead costs. They print these things up. They have staff that do all the editing. Anyhow, so there's a price attached to it. Basically, it's paid per page. This is a long one at over 40 pages. So 177 Swiss franc. Right now, it's about 220 US. But I would say, and again, I don't get a cut from this, but it's great value for the money. You've got 42 pages with all this great information that would take you so long to do on your own. And now we've put that together for you. So I think that's one of the beauties of the whole ISO framework. It drove me crazy going through it because it was so slow. But it is really good. And once I got through it all, I could better understand the benefit from it and why it really is set up as it is. And oh, by the way, if this has piqued anyone's interest in either the metrics committee, or there are other committees within human resources, and then there are whole other technical committees altogether. ISO is always looking for volunteers. So as long as you would be considered an expert in your field, and we have lots of them, then your body, like an ANSA, would be happy to take you in as an expert, and that's how you first join your national body, and then you join the ISO group that you want to contribute to. So that's kind of how it works, but they're always looking for more help. You've got my email there, but hopefully, and like I said, if anyone's curious about those other approaches, I've got slides for those, but let's just stop here for a second and see where you'd like to go. What questions would you have? What do you want to know more about?
I'm working on actual applications. So how do you guys, what's the definition for actual application, and how does ISO calculate that?
Okay, so let's go back to application.
You had
So
you had intent to apply, but I'm like, actual application, I think I know, but I wanted to pick your brain
actual application,
and
yeah,
drill
that's a
down,
great question.
drill down to actual application.
Yeah, can be done one of two ways. Sometimes you can do it observationally, and some might argue, depending on the application, that observation's better. Like maybe safety training, maybe you'd actually want supervisors trained to observe whether their employees are following what they learned in a safety course. Of course, if you do that, you're going to prepare the supervisors for that. So you're going to need to tell the supervisors what you taught their employees. Then you're going to need to give them a checklist. You're going to need to work with them all so they check each item on that consistently among them all, so they know how to score it. So when you add them all up, you've got consistent and reliable results coming from the observers. Because of that, and because observation is generally harder and hard to scale, the most common way to measure actual application is in that survey. So a survey monkey done 2 to 3 months after the fact, where again, you're asking, what percentage of the content were you able to apply? You'd want to remind them what it is you're talking about. So thinking back to the course you took 3 months ago that had these learning objectives in it, what percentage of that content were you able to apply? So that's the simple answer to your question. Some who know their companies well, and if you knew there were issues in your company, because you've seen it so often, of employees when they get back not getting support from their supervisor or not having the tools to do what they were taught to do, you could also proactively ask those questions. Certainly in your follow-up survey, ask those questions. Some even though add those to the post-event survey if you kind of have a feeling that could be a problem. Because then when you get a poor result on application, you've got some data out there to begin to indicate to you what the cause might be. So what do you think? Is that a start to the answer?
Yeah, I'm going down that path, and I'll touch base with you next week with stuff I'm doing to see if it's something you might want to add to the ISO standards, because we're actually going to ask people by objective if they're actually performing it. So that's
okay.
Do it that way, and then we'll know percentage of people by each of performance objective, which is similar to what you do. I mean, ideally, the best way would go out actually observe the people doing each objective, and then if they don't do it, asking why they don't do it, because that's the real good key theme of the thing is like, yeah, I don't perform this objective. Great. 20% of the people don't perform that objective, but of that 20%, why not? Maybe they're in the wrong location, or they don't have the equipment, or they don't have the support, whatever the key reasons are that can just justify the reason. But that's kind of where we're going to go at the path I'm working on at the
I like breaking it down further, and that's not too different than what some people do for very long learning. So 3 or 5 day courses that have multiple objectives. Some people want to ask the application question for each topic, whether that's for each day or each topic because they're afraid that if 5 days passes, it's all just too lumped together and the result may not be meaningful. And they'd like to get a little more specific feedback.
Yeah. Erwin, you raised your hand. Do you have a question?
Yeah. I worked in organizations where a chunk of the significant chunk of the workforce had to meet proficiency requirements before they could do their work. It's not dissimilar in a way from a doctor, right? They have to know how to do surgery or cataract surgery or what have you. But it seems to me the fundamental problem with most of the learning organizations that deal with, leadership development and minor skill development, they'll offer courses in Excel or leadership development, those sorts of things. They don't measure the proficiency of the individuals in the course. And without that kind of knowledge, I mean, you can write easy or hard test questions too to measure proficiency, but without a level of proficiency evident, I think all of this is just overkill. I don't think it's going to produce much value because um, just like you pointed out about the outcome measures that Phillips talked about, the salespeople their performance typically hinges on the quality of their manager and the performance incentives that they have and the quality of the product. If there's a launch of a new product immediately after a person finishes the course or a group of people finish the course, of course sales will go up, but it's not due to the course. And so I think this is just, this is more a level where you might imagine a superintendent of schools trying to understand how well his teachers or her teachers are doing. But so I think the lack of focus on proficiency isn't going to move the needle much in this. The plus of this, of course, first of all, a lot of ideas, and a lot of people will be able to use them. I also think the storytelling part is very important. A lot of learning leaders don't know how to communicate to leadership the impact of their training, and this would give them a structure to try to do that. But I think fundamentally the proficiency problem is the failing. A lot of companies say we can't measure our companies inside the company. It would cause too many problems for us.
Hmm.
So it's a catch-22 in the learning world.
Right. No, I think your point's right. And I think there does need to be focus on the proficiency levels and the skill levels. And so it wouldn't hurt to do it both ways because you wouldn't want to do just proficiencies either. If a lot of work is being done today on general skill levels, and I think proficiency is a way to measure that. But what I'm afraid of at the end of the day is, let's just say as a company, you're doing this, and after a year, you've got the pre and you've got the post, and you can show that the average workforce proficiency level went from 3.3 to 3.5. Now, we in learning might know how hard it was to move at those 2/10, but I'm not sure if you present that to a CEO or a CFO, they're going to see it was worth all that was spent on learning. In fact, I'm afraid it kind of leaves them saying, yes, so.
Exactly, yeah.
Uh, so I agree, and I think AI is going to make it easier to get a handle on proficiency. So I'm excited about that. But for the type of learning, like where we're trying to increase sales or increase proficiency, then I think there is still value to trying to isolate the impact on that. In your example, you would have to isolate the impact of the new product, perhaps from the training, or group the two together and get some agreement that it's absolutely essential to have it if you're going to get the value of the new products that come out. But you're going to have to work through that because you've got to be able to show, and you hopefully show that it did make a difference. That if you didn't do the training, it wouldn't have been as good. So these are all tools that we can use, and yeah, sometimes you rely more on some than on others, and often you need a balance.
Yeah, I keep thinking that you need to identify all the factors that influence performance and results and outcomes, and take into mind, yes, well, learning and development is important, but what are the other factors, and somehow track how those lead to the performance and results and ROI.
Well, right. And those of you with that broader performance consulting view can offer help to organizations outside of just learning. So some people in L&D may just need to focus on the learning part of that. But for some of you that have that broader performance consulting experience, that's exactly right. So what we would suggest, just like in TDRP, is that you have a meeting early on with those goal owners, like the head of sales, ideally proactively before the end of your current fiscal year. And you find out from your CEO who those goal owners are going to be for the following year, and you go talk to them. And you have that high level performance discussion, especially if it's a new goal owner or a new goal with them. And you dive into all the reasons, all the levers they might pull to achieve their goal and what needs to go right. Learning may or may not be part of that set. If it is, then you can pursue that. But there'll probably be others that you might need to help them with as well, or involve your colleagues from other areas of HR, if it's a pay issue, incentive issue, whatever else it is, hiring issue. But you're right, it should ideally start from that high level performance viewpoint. And we don't do enough of that.
Yeah, any other questions for Dave?
I will share an example. Max has heard me say this, but when I was a university professor, I probably had 10 years of teacher evaluations, and they were required by the universities and all of that. In 10 years of teaching, I never had an evaluation that changed my teaching behavior.
Mm.
What changed my teaching behavior is when I went and asked a couple of my students if I could look at their notes. And when I saw their notes, I went, oh my God, they're missing all the important points in their notes. And so I changed my behavior as the instructor to highlight things they should add to their notes in various ways. And and I did other things like that. But universities all over the world require teacher evaluation, which is a form of this kind of measurement in many cases. And I think there's just too many other variables that operate. And what's really needed in the learning evaluation is innovative approaches to tackle micro learning and to tackle using AI effectively and those sorts of things, rather than the ISO standard for all of this. So that's my 2 cents.
Well, hopefully for something like this, if there are some other measures that should be considered or other approaches, then through the feedback you're giving me, we would include those in ISO. So rather than looking away from ISO, hopefully ISO will evolve through time to capture those suggestions and that thinking.
Well, and the fact that the ISO standard includes application and results and ROI is really significant, along with the other standard sorts of measures, and that it includes, standard reports,
Right.
maybe it will move organizations in the direction of, measuring application, measuring outcomes, measuring ROI. So that, it's definitely a comprehensive direction.
Yeah, and like I said, it's a start. It's not the last word, it's the first word. Just trying to get people on board and going with this. And then let it evolve through time to improve with time. Because there are certainly other frameworks out there. Thalheimer, a 10 item approach. There are other approaches out there that dive into greater detail at levels 1, 2, and 3. It's just a matter of a standard can only be so complex before it just becomes too complex. And we were already stretching the limit.
So here's the key metric. How many people have bought the standard? Do they
I
tell
don't
you
have
that?
access to that. I don't
Okay,
know.
as I said, how popular is this? How many, but again, you could develop it if you develop it, but nobody buys it or uses it. Because that's the other question. It's like people bought it, and then of the people that bought it actually used part of it. Because that's kind of that'd be your next metric. It's kind of like your intent to apply and actual application of the ISO standards.
Right, exactly. So what I can say is for the first year, it was the most popular of the TC 260 metrics. They wouldn't give me the sales data, but it was the most popular after it came out. But all this also depends on all of us. It's now all of you have heard this. So if you think others would find value in this, let them know it exists. Scott, I'll give you the deck if you want to share it with everyone. You put it on your site, however you want to do that.
Yeah, please email that to me, and then again, we usually put the recording on our YouTube. It's because it explains that. But that's the problem with you can send the deck to people who miss this, but it doesn't have the great narration and examples and the questions and all that kind of stuff. So we've determined that the recordings are actually almost better than just the deck because the decks are like, what do you do with the deck? And then now if you have like some specific question about the deck, you just zip to the recording part and there's Dave explaining that slide. You're like, oh, this is perfect.
It's easier to use the deck to look at the thing than to play a recording to find the thing you want to look at.
Yeah, so it works in a combination of stuff. So again, thanks
so
for
if
your
it could be mailed out, that would be
we'll mail the deck out also to
that'd be great.
A combination of
but share it broadly. There's no copyright here. I mean, this is to be shared.
It's a lot of classic. It's a lot of classic TRDP, but now it's now part of an ISO standard, which brings some credibility to it because it's not the Dave Vance metrics, it's ISO. So I think that's the key thing about it, that you can probably convince people that it's a higher power or higher organization that certified this than the Scott Weersing learning metrics or the Dave Vance metrics.
Right. And maybe the next version, so what kind of comes after this is begin to get into requirements. So a lot of people have said, well, how do I use this to become certified in L&D metrics? Some people like that.
Yeah, because that's my familiarity is like ISO 9001 certified. Well, that's because you did all that kind of stuff. And that'd be the next kind of things that like, how are we, how we're an ISO certified learning organization in this thing? I'm like, oh, good question.
Right.
But that's you have to set the standards first and then figure out what that would look like.
Exactly. So that's on our list to do is in a few years, once this is socialized and we've got a foundation, then to see if we can't come up with a standard document that would be used for certification. So we'll see. I don't know, but we'll see.
Yeah, who knows? All right. Well, thanks again, everybody. Again, next month, I think it's around October 18th, Richard Clark from USC, University of Southern California. For all my people out here on the East Coast, it's the University of Southern California. We're speaking about a lot of learning myths that are debunked by research. And so that'll be a fascinating one. He's a classic ISBI speaker. And then JD Dillon speaking in November. So thanks for everybody for taking the time and being part of this. And we'll see you next month.